So we have been discussing in the past couple of weeks the Peace and Development Nexus in Africa, but approach from a governance, financing, and country systems standpoint. Before jumping into the specific subject or theme of this webinar, allow me to present very quickly the conceptual value chain behind the online training course. Basically, the conceptual framework of this online training course is a value chain, as I call a conceptual value chain, with 4 main pillars. The first one is that durable peace requires sustainable development. Everything else, short-term solutions, short-term approaches are band-aids. The second conceptual pillar is so durable peace requires sustainable development. Sustainable development requires sustainable financing. Sustainable development is a long-term journey. Long-term journey requires long-term financing paths. Third, sustainable financing requires control over flows, natural resource flows, economic flows, financial flows, you name it. And the last one, control over flows, natural resource, economic, financial, requires effective institutions and governance. And this is today's subject. So we'll be focused, narrowing on the fourth conceptual pillar of OSAA's online training course. And allow me to read the exact title of today's webinar. Control over economic and financial flows requires strong and effective institutions and governance. I do believe that this statement by itself, it's quite obvious. It's quite obvious. But allow me to say that after realizing that Africa was, as we said in our previous webinars, that Africa have been captured by a financing paradox, which is Africa is rich in financial resources. And I'm not mentioning natural resources because natural resources everybody knows. I'm intentionally saying rich in financial resources, money, cash, by the end of the day. But at the same time, on almost a permanent debt distress and sometimes begging for ODA. So this is the financing paradox. To break it, to break this financing paradox, we need to build strong domestic resource mobilization, shifting from an external, a mindset that is connected to external solutions to a mindset that is essentially connected with internal solutions, meaning Africa's own assets and financial flow. So, and in fact, to break the breaking of this finance paradox, as we mentioned in our flagship report of 2024, is an important precondition to unpack the understanding, to unpack the narrative on how Africa's debt has been approached, analyzed, understood, and consequently on the solutions to address the debt distress challenge. In fact, our flagship 2024 report, the title is a quite exciting title, Unpacking Debt in Africa Towards a Lasting and Durable Solution. And the key themes for discussion today are how effective governance frameworks can tackle and control financial outflows, improve debt management, and enhance domestic resource mobilization. Second, the role of digital public infrastructure in promoting transparency and accountability, but also in promoting ownership over these financial and economic flows. Because in the 21st century, it will be impossible to increase the ownership or the control of Africa's economic and financial flows without understanding the role and space that we need to give to digital transformation and consequently to digital public infrastructure. And the third is how policy coherence across sectors, both vertically and horizontally, strengthens governance and resilience. We reach a stage where policymaking delivered based on silos entails a huge opportunity cost. And now this opportunity cost has been increasing because there are technological solutions that can address the problem. So once you have technological solutions ready to support you and you keep just delivering the same business as usual, your opportunity cost, even if you change nothing, will increase. Will increase because it's a relative number. So basically, we'd like to, this module 4, as everybody knows, participants are supposed to submit an essay, model 4 essay. And we'd like to take the opportunity to encourage all participants in this online training course. Please take with enthusiasm, with excitement, the writing of an essay. And the idea of this essay is very simple, is to take the conceptual framework of this online training course and make it land in your own country. Let's say that I'm from Burundi or I'm from Liberia, for example. So the idea is to take the 4 conceptual pillars that I just present in a very quick way, and you ask yourself how these 4 pillars land in my country. And this is essentially the purpose of the let's say the essay. Now going quickly to the webinar. Today's panel discussion will address these themes in depth, as I mentioned, and with insights from an outstanding set of panelists. We could not enjoy better than this one. Thank you very much. So I will be moderating the session. So I'm Cristina Duarte, Special Advisor on Africa to the Secretary General, very quickly. And I would like now to introduce the panelists of this webinar very quickly. Allow me to start by my dear sister, Geraldine Fraser Moleketi. Theoretically, she doesn't need introduction. She doesn't need. She has been among in Africa in the African leadership for decades. She's from South Africa, but allow me to, in a formal way, Geraldine, introduce you, if you allow me. So Mrs. Fraser Moleketi is a governance and public policy expert who has served in various high-level roles, including as South Africa Minister of Public Service and Administration. She's currently the Chancellor of the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa and the chair of the UN Committee of Experts on Public Administration. Her extensive experience in public service systems and championing governance initiatives makes her a key voice in today's conversation. Geraldine, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Our second speaker is Professor Fozo, Augustin Fozo, a distinguished economist and professor. Professor Fozo's research on institutional frameworks and economic growth provide critical insights into how strong institutions can foster sustainable development. One of our lectures is exactly from Professor Fozo. Our third speaker, Hélio Varela, and Mr. Varela is an expert in digital transformation and has led groundbreaking e-governance initiatives in Cape Verde, which have become global models for transparency, efficiency, and public finance management. When I was Minister of Finance and Planning for 10 years, Mr. Varela was the one that supported me reforming in a completely, I believe, structured way, the public finance management system in Cape Verde, bringing accountability, transparency, efficiency in state responsibilities. Our fourth speaker, I don't know if Sarah is connected, is Mrs. Amuda. Sarah Amuda, my dear friend from APRM,
yes,
coordinates. She's not connected?
I am connected. I'm just saying I'm here.
Okay, very good, very good. So she coordinates governance programs at the African Peer Review Mechanism, focused on Agenda 2063 and the SDGs. Her expertise in governance enablers and SDG 16 monitoring, SDG monitoring will add valuable perspectives on policy coherence and trust building. So as you can see, we have 4 outstanding panelists. Now let's move quickly to panel discussion. But basically, we have 3 guiding questions. And I'll be allocating these 3 guiding questions to a set of 2 panelists per questions. So we conduct this conversation in a structured way. So the first guiding question, or guiding question number 1, I will ask Geraldine and Elio to take the floor when I provide you the floor. Let me, and the theme of this guiding question is institutional strengthening and debt management. So allow me to start with you, my dear sister Geraldine. So, and I have 2 questions and I will ask both at the same time, so you have more conceptual room to respond to both at the same time. First question, how can African nations utilize strong institutions to exercise greater control over economic and financial flows and improve debt management? Again, the role of strong institutions in controlling flows. And when you control flows, you can also improve dramatically your debt management. Second, Geraldine, what role does institutional reform play in fostering sustainable debt management practices? And how can African nations prioritize these reforms amidst competing demands? My dear sister Geraldine, back to you.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, good morning. I think it's a very exciting moment and very exciting theme. And I'm going to deal with some of this in a very broad sense. So the first issue that I do want to raise is particularly, and I'm looking at the whole issue of institution strengthening from the perspective of policy as well, and policy cohesion and policy coherence. And I'd want to argue this afternoon that in order for us to look at the whole question of institutional strengthening, we've got to look at how do we enhance institution building, but above all, ensure that institution building responds to a particular context and plan within either the countries or the region within which we find ourselves. Under Secretary General, you've provoked us today and say, what can we do to really think out of the box? How do we look at this through an African lens? And I am going to argue today that it may require us to do some of the basic things in a different way. One of the issues is, and I'm going to use the example of South Africa, is the fact that maybe we should review the processes of our macroeconomic planning, firstly. And secondly, we must look at how that will result in strategic frameworks that will be supported by, and in our instance, it's a medium-term expenditure framework. I actually wonder, Alexandro, if you for a minute can just put up a presentation that I have, because I'd want to go through some of the issues raised. It's very plain vanilla, this presentation, nothing that's out of the ordinary. But in this, I talk about the whole issue of the employment of vertical and horizontal policy cohesion, which I referred to earlier, that will have an impact on public administration and management. I lift that from the perspective to a point that was raised again by the USG around optimizing domestic resource mobilization systems that will enhance the delivery of public goods and services in order to really give traction to the development agenda in countries and in our region in particular. Having said that, I believe that this requires integrated planning that engages all spheres of the public sector. And when I talk about the spheres, I talk about national or federal government. I talk about provincial government as well as local government, and the ability to be able to work across those spheres of government. The reason that I call it spheres and not tiers is that I don't believe that it's stacking one on top of the other, but it's actually about the interlinkages. And these interlinkages is also quite critical when building institutions. And in the process, it's something that needs to inform the whole approach to financial planning. And the whole issue of the medium-term expenditure framework that I referred to here is the question of ensuring that there are, as stated earlier, sufficient financial resources that will support planning processes and frameworks. It goes to the point that was raised earlier, that sustainable development requires sustainable finance. And, we need to see how we deal with that. Having said that, I'm actually just going to take you, I don't seem to be able to move the slide. I want to take you to a point that talks about the frameworks required. I'm going to come to conceptual issues at a later point. I don't think it's required at this particular point. But I'm going to conclude, and I hope that I'm helping this discussion along. I want to conclude on the South African case, where the National Development Plan is the one that offers a vision and goal that the country needs to strive in the long term. What is the type of society South Africa should be? Similarly, as Agenda 2063 tries to project what Africa should be, within that, and I'll come back to this point repeatedly, we do need strong institutions, whether at local, provincial, and national levels, or even regional levels. We need strong institutions to ensure that a vision doesn't remain a vision, but that we're able to transform that, move from a vision into a plan. But this requires multi-sectoral engagement to really make a difference. Let me conclude then that, and conclude on a point that says that even when you build structures and institutions, and here in the instance, I look at the whole integrated development plans that were developed at a municipal level in South Africa, that if there isn't full engagement in the actual planning process from a local level or top down, you can have quite a lackluster response, and in essence, not really meet the requisite development goals that has been set in place. And in the instance of South Africa, the district development model had as a control mechanism regular community feedback in open forums in order to hold various government players accountable. So in essence, I've thrown together, I think, the whole question of the importance of institutions, the importance of policies, vertical and horizontal. I haven't defined it. I think we'll have a different point at which we come back. The whole question of accountability. What are the control mechanisms required in order to ensure that accountability is there in essence through a direct interface with the citizens, and to do it in such a manner where we, through the planning process, will have institutions that respond to what's required to take things forward. And sort of end with one very difficult example of the South African Revenue Services, which is considered one of our premier institutions in terms of efficacy. And it's quite lauded, not only in South Africa, but globally as well, on the continent and beyond. But we've seen that in 2018, over 9 billion rands were lost to illicit financial flows. I think the Undersecretary General spoke about the fact that Africa is also rich in finances, in money. And here we see the outflows. And why is it that we see that? And it is because of shortage of personnel that's led to reduced transparency in investigations, greater efficacy of the role of the Financial Intelligence Center for inadvertently, in instances, facilitating illicit financial flows. And then, of course, inadequate institutional capacity, which is currently being worked on, which is National Treasury, the South African Revenue Services, the Financial Intelligence Center, and the law enforcement branch of government. So I haven't necessarily responded directly to the issue of debt management, but I've dealt more broadly with some of the issues around the policy and institutional questions. Thank you very much, USG.
My dear Sister Geraldine, we could not start better this webinar with such outstanding remarks and presentation. Thank you. You did not discuss the technicalities of debt management. It was not the purpose. What you said first laid out beautiful for Elio's intervention. Beautiful. And I would like just to underscore 2 or 3 points that will link with Elio's intervention, when I will just jump to the next 2 questions for him. You mentioned 3 important ideas. First, you underscore planning. And allow me that based on your intervention, Geraldine, you position planning as maybe macroeconomic planning, sectoral planning, maybe in today's challenges, maybe one of the most important institutions in Africa. Because if we want to deliver sustainable development, long-term challenge, and you need sustainable finance, long-term capital, the only way is to put institutions in place. But institutions are not new ministries, are not new committees, are not new departments. Institutions is exactly what you mentioned in your intervention, is a strong national planning system, driven by a vision, as you mentioned, driven by a vision and bounded, let's say, by clear strategic frameworks. And you mentioned 1, medium-term expenditures framework. Today, and I bring this quick number to the discussion, Africa loses $78 billion in efficient public spending. This is lack of planning. This is lack of strategic frameworks. And I would add the medium-term fiscal framework that are in this relation. Thank you very much. And now I would like to move to Elio. Elio, I have 2 questions that link with my dear sister Geraldine's intervention. Thank you again, Geraldine. First, and I will ask the 2 questions at the same time so you can respond in an integrated way, Elio. Based on what Geraldine said, in what ways can digital public infrastructure enhance transparency and institutional efficiency? This says in managing debt, but you can go beyond that, because when you control flows, you are ready to manage your debt in a much better way. Second question, Elio. In your view, what are the most important considerations for African countries to consider when leveraging technology to ensure accountability and enhance institutional capacity in public finance management? Back to you, Elio. I think you are going to present your PPT directly, correct?
Yes, but I would like, before starting my presentation, Christina, to thank you very much to giving me the floor to talk about this issue, which I think is very important. I think digital should have a different meaning in Africa than it has in the rest of the world. Okay? You mentioned many times we need to create our own narrative, and I really think I believe that digital has a different weight in Africa than in the rest of the world. But as you know, Christina, we just came from an election system, right?
Yes.
In Cape Verde, municipalities, And I think you know that one of the municipalities, there was one party that won by one vote. One vote. And it is incredible. I'm happy because there is no instability. Everyone went home the day before. Everyone came back in the day after, and everyone is accepting normally the results by one vote. I can't imagine how many countries have gone through this, a few votes, and it created huge instabilities, recounting, whatever. This happened, Christina, because we have put in place strong systems, of course, with strong institutions, strong systems that gave confidence to the society. I mean, one vote, and everyone is okay. I'm still amazed, but this has a lot to do with the credibility that the whole process of census, the whole process of voting, the whole process of counting and communicating to the society gave the sense of transparency, the sense of efficiency, accountability,
Yes.
that there is no instability in this country after one vote election, okay? One vote difference election. I would ask, please, Alessandro, to put in my presentation. As you know, Christina, I'm a tech guy, okay? But I think as time goes on, the word tech starts losing relevance in my way of thinking, okay? And I will try to explain why. I intitulated this presentation as New Narrative, okay? Please, let me try and... You have given context, Christina, but I will reinforce the context.
Yes, please, yes.
Saying that in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, Africa has grown in its GDP at around 3%, 3.4%, below the expectations, okay? And it has grown on population as well, around 2.5% per year, okay? So the GDP per capita has not moved, okay? On the contrary, the Africans have lost purchasing power because of inflation, okay? So we need to look at this. This model is not improving our lives, okay? It's not improving our lives. Of course, we have a vision, an agenda for the next, for the future. And we see at our potential, we understand our potential, so we want to become a powerhouse. And this is supported on our potential, on what we have. So this context, I think it's very important to register. And you have mentioned it several times. It's never too late to reinforce this. We live in a paradox of asking for money when we sit on billions, when we lose billions. So it doesn't make much sense that we supported our development in external aid. And we have not been able to solve internal issues that could maybe allow us to have a different type of development that internal, external aid conditions, okay? You have well mentioned in a different way, but we are sitting on a golden pot in Africa. We are. We have raw material, but for hundreds of years, the model that has been destined for Africa was to be the source of raw materials to export to the other continents that make value, give value aggregation to that through industrialization, through transformation. And of course, this impacts their development. So the model for Africa up to now has been that. We have raw material, but we export it, they change it, and they develop much better than us. And then sometimes they bring it back so we can absorb it as well. So the emphasis for Africa certainly must be, we need to aggregate on our existing materials, raw materials we have, okay? And if you want to do this, and this becomes my love, not, it's being extended from digital to something else, I have a deep conviction, Christina, a deep conviction that if we try to leap, if you want to go faster and to exploit and aggregate on top of what we already have in Africa, we need to invest critically on digital.
Yes.
Digital is a survival issue. It's a survival issue. It's not like an add-on, an upgrade. No, it's a survival issue. That's what my years of experience in my country and in Africa led me to believe. We cannot look at digital the way we are being induced into looking at digital. We have to look at digital in an African perspective, okay? Digital can help us accelerate our levels of development so we can be competitive in a competitive world, okay? But knowledge is the base of everything. Knowledge is the base of everything. And when we look at the data, the raw data, we can see that Africa, knowledge-wise, the education in Africa, we are lagging behind. We are lagging behind. All the indicators show that we have a challenge in having better education, better access to knowledge, so that we can compete. That will be the base for our future, okay? UNESCO, the UN has done some studies where they prove that there is a direct correlation between each year of education and the impact, each additional year and the impact on GDP. I think it's about 0.37%. So there is a direct correlation in getting access to knowledge. That's why we need to improve these numbers in order to be more efficient in getting the right skills in our societies. And this is where the opportunity resides.
Mm.
If you look at what represents this new era, we are in a new era, the era of knowledge, some call it the fourth industrial revolution. And we need to look at what was before. In the industrial age, the skills needed, they were different because it was the manufacturing, the industry that would aggregate. Now it's different and the skills are different. In the traditional way of education, the educator is an expert. Now he should be a facilitator. The logic of the factory model now is a one-to-one, a self-directed and explanatory. Target age is not the age that we know of the education systems. It's a lifelong learning that we need to constantly improve. The teacher for this area is not the logic that I'm the one that controls. No, I'm the facilitator and anyone can collaborate and teach. And the access is not the physical classroom. This new era, the access is anywhere. Now, everyone, all the countries, all the societies in the world are trying to adapt their institutions, are trying to adapt their education systems to take the maximum profits out of the potential of the technology. But they are struggling. Everyone is struggling. And this is where I see the opportunity in Africa. Because we have more fragile institutions, which is a weakness, but can be our stronger dimension because it's easier to make changes in Africa. It's easier to implement new ideas. It's easier to implement new technologies. This should be our opportunity to start not to follow the traditional way of doing things, which all the other societies are trying to overcome, but to leapfrog to new models of reaching knowledge. So it is my strongest conviction that to reduce poverty and promote prosperity in Africa, we need to think of energy and connectivity as essential goods. And we probably need to create a different narrative of internet or divide internet in two areas. I call it social internet. The social internet is the way that the society accesses education services, health services, public services, basic commerce, and collaboration. This social internet, if we want to develop, accelerate development in Africa, should be a free resource. Contrary to more advanced countries, where everyone pays to have access to the internet. It doesn't matter if it's for social productivity or fun or entertainment. But Africa needs to see this dimension of technology, of internet, access to technology, as two different dimensions. For social interventions should be free. And this could give us leverage to leapfrog our development process. And here comes maybe allow me to detail a little bit about the DPI, digital public infrastructure. Honestly, I don't like this word. I prefer digital country infrastructure, because the public infrastructure, you might misunderstand it with public service, and it's not. The digital public infrastructure is the infrastructure that will allow the society and all the institutions, public and private, to address the digital world in a structured and productive manner. So there is like a layer, a common layer that you need to set up in your countries in order to be efficient in creating a digital ecosystem. And it's called digital public infrastructure, DPI, which has a lot of dimensions. And here as well, I think Africa should put a touch on that, because we need to look in an African perspective. I believe DPI is the basis for a new narrative for Africa. When you talk that we need to leapfrog on education, on health, on transformation, I believe this is the key factor.
Yes.
The first one is the connectivity. If we really want to make a difference, an impactful, and we want to accelerate our development, energy and connectivity must be an essential good, as I mentioned before. Every African should have access, free access to connectivity, or at a supported value amount. Today, an African will spend much more of his salary to access the internet than an European or an American. So we need to separate. Access internet for social impact should be free in Africa. For entertainment, of course, it should be paid. I work today, I used to work for government, e-government, and today I work on a telecom. And trust me, when we talk about internet for the social part, we are not talking about a huge cost for the operators, not at all. If we tackle this issue and create an ecosystem where in Africa, access to digital for development is free, we can make a huge difference and huge impact in accelerating our development. But I was saying DPI, the core of the DPI, I think for Africa should be energy and connectivity. Should be side by side with other critical issues in Africa, like hunger, like health, because this is a way to eliminate hunger. This is a way to improve health systems. So the energy and connectivity is critical. The other one is open standards. Africa needs to create content, but not in the way that it's not collaborative, does not involve our local companies. So the open standards, which allow collaboration and allows deep involvement of local institutions and companies and local skills, is critical for Africa. We need to innovate and create our own solutions from Africa to Africa. So open standards is critical. Then we have the three levels, which I would call the core systems of DPI: financial inclusion, digital financial inclusion, verifiable identification. We need to work on identification systems that will allow efficiency on the digital platform, and secure data flows. The information must be secure, must be accountable, must be verifiable. So these three layers are critical to implement on a country, specifically in Africa: energy and connectivity and open standards. And finally, I deeply believe that the world is shaking with this technology, artificial intelligence. Everybody is going from a huge potential to need to be regulated. It's something that the countries are looking with, let's say, much care. We should look at that. But I believe artificial intelligence has given us the possibility to improve and to accelerate Africa on the digital ecosystem. But Africa needs to innovate, needs to be on front of all these matters, not following. If we are able, like Asia has done in a certain way, if we are able to lead the innovation in the world for our own development, Africa will be able to honor the potential that it has on materials. So I believe that DPI...
Elio, help me manage the time. Help me manage the time, Elio.
Okay, sure. Sorry, thank you. So I believe that this is the key infrastructure for the development of Africa. I will not go into details on the DPI, but its identity, payment systems, data exchange platforms are critical for efficiency. Yes. Energy and connectivity, as I said, will guarantee a reliable ecosystem infrastructure to transform Africa, but this must be accessible for everyone.
Yes.
The open standards, as I mentioned before, it's a journey that will include open source, open solutions that will involve the local communities. And artificial intelligence will allow us to create, there is a term which I will go through directly, which is the sovereign artificial intelligence. We have, the artificial intelligence is a way to share knowledge between a community or world. But in this sharing of knowledge, there is a tutoring of information. And there is a need for Africa and countries in Africa to protect their values, to protect their legal infrastructure, to protect the future and our potential through information. It's fundamental. I would say as well, it's a critical issue for Africa to create sovereign artificial intelligence instruments that will allow and will have impacts in all the areas of government, from financial systems, from agriculture, from education, from health. All of this can be fostered in an Africa culture and values. So artificial intelligence as well should be part of DPI and should be part of a strategy for Africa. So I will end up by saying that Africa has the
Sorry, we need to move to the next question, Elio. I'm completely running out of time.
Yes. So
anyway, your presentation, I think your presentation, of course, if you allow us, would be considered as well. Geraldine's presentation will be considered didactic materials of the online training course and make them available to the participants of the online training course. Elliot, thank you very much. I will not summarize your outstanding presentation. You said it all. So allow me to move to the second guiding question very quickly: domestic resource mobilization and trust in governance. And I will start with Professor Fozu, and I will ask the two questions at the same time because we need to manage time. First, Professor Fozu is connected. I need to verify that.
Yes, indeed, I'm connected, Madam Moderator.
Okay, good morning, Professor. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Madam.
What a pleasure to see you again. So, Professor Fozu,
thank you.
What strategy can African governments implement to strengthen domestic resource mobilization? When I say resource, because I want to underscore that R goes beyond revenue. We are talking about resources in a holistic way. To strengthen domestic resource mobilization and reduce dependency on external financing. Second question, Professor Fozu. How can African nations balance the need for increased taxation with the imperative of maintaining public trust and social equity in domestic resource mobilization efforts? Professor Fozu, back to you, and I beg you to help me with time management.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I listened with a great deal of interest to the two presentations, and I think that a number of suggestions made are extremely useful in terms of what African governments or policymakers can do. You know, I've spoken to many of them. Many a time, they ask the question, well, we have an idea as to what to do, but how to do what we're supposed to do. And for some reason, what we're supposed to do never gets done. So what is the problem? It looks as if the problem is much more fundamental than what to do. I think that in the final analysis, it is institutional framework. And for example, if you take a look at, say, growth, there are a lot of growth episodes around. For some reason, the growth is not sustained. And obviously, growth becomes important in terms of resource mobilization, because if you don't have the assets, you cannot have the revenues from those assets, and so on. So in the final analysis, it is a matter of making sure that we have the appropriate framework, the appropriate what we refer to as syndrome-free regime, in order for us to be able to do a number of these kinds of things. And that is, we need to have a stable regime with reasonably market-friendly policies. I think in the final analysis, without having this regime, many of the what to do are not going to get done. And so once again, we must go to the first principles. And as I've submitted already, it is a matter of trying to avoid too many state controls, address redistribution, suboptimal intertemporal resource allocation, and state breakdown. And if we were to do this, we will certainly generate sufficient sustained growth to be able to do many of these kinds of things in terms of interest in reducing poverty, etc. So the question now becomes, how do we ensure that we have a syndrome-free regime? Once again, the premise of institutions here matters. As we well discussed and the new institutional economics. And normally we talk about good governance in terms of freedom from government repudiation of contracts. I repeat, freedom from government repudiation of contracts. A, B, freedom from expropriation. C, rule of law. And D, bureaucratic quality. Without these kinds of things, we are not going to succeed in terms of getting done the what which have been proposed. But the question becomes, how do you attain this so-called good governance or good institution? Now, there could be a number of policy instruments that could be used, but one that I've experimented with is constraint with the executive branch of government. Constraint in the executive branch of government, executive constraint, and this type of institutional policy instrument can help generate syndrome-free regimes, and it can do that independently or by mitigating the potential pernicious effect of ethnicity. If we can get this done, then all these issues about what we are supposed to do can be resolved. That is one policy instrument that we should be thinking about. So I'll leave it here, Madam Moderator, and thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Professor Fausto, as expected, you go to the you go to the point in a such nice way. I like the way you start. What to do, everybody knows. But if everybody knows what to do, why you are not doing? This is a very fundamental question. And of course, in order to understand this, again, paradox, it might be a contradiction, we need to understand the root causes of preventing us doing, even though we know what to do. And you have laid down in a very, I believe, important way, let's say, a conceptual approach to get to the root causes of the problem. Thank you very much. And I'm going to move quickly to Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, for being today with us. And I will also put the two questions at the same time so you have more conceptual space in your responses. From the APRM experience with African countries, what roles do planning, policy coherence, and cross-sectoral alignment play in strengthening governance resilience? Second, how can APRM insights guide countries in building trust through inclusive governance and participatory resource mobilization policies? Sarah, back to you.
Thank you so much, Christina. All protocols is observed. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Perfect. I just want to say that I really, really enjoyed the conversation and the presentations. And I want to thank Madame Lokiti for nominating me somehow to be part of this panel, or engaging me in the work that SIPA is doing on policy coherence and strengthening public institutions in Africa. I would like to move quickly to your questions, but before sharing the slides, I just want to say that from the previous presentations, it's clearly that from the African experience and the big picture, we can see that conflict in the continent, for instance, is a very important variable for all countries which have high risk of debt distress. I was going through a report from, I think, the UN Global Crisis this morning, and if you look at the countries with the highest risk of debt distress in the continent are Burundi, Cameroon, Central Republic Africa, Chad, Comoros, Gambia, Guinea, Mozambique, Sierra Leone, South Sudan, countries with post-conflict situation or countries going through political transition. So I think it's very important to look at the overall picture from the political dynamics and how conflict is also affecting the country's capacity, whether to address debt management or enhance resource mobilization strategies. The second point that I want to refer to is that African countries are facing different challenges for credit rating risk, for the burden of debt management in the continent, and also for easing public debt management and enhancing transparency and accountability. And that's why all the conversation regarding policy coherence is coming out. If you allow me, my presentation is already shared, so I will not go through all the slides. I will just go through why policy coherence matters for not only good governance, but also sustainable development. I hope you can see the slides on your end. But we established a continental program with the OECD to see how far policy coherence is contributing to the implementation of Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2063. And we are coming with argumentation that policy coherence is important to balance the socioeconomic and environmental priorities for African countries, to also inform choices about sustainable development, and to also consider how domestic policies, including resource mobilization, can affect negatively or positively well-being of people. I will not go through all the slides, but if you look at SDG 16 in particular, and the conversation that you are also leading, Christina, regarding the illicit financial flows, it shows how good governance, transparency, accountability of government also affect the implementation of other goals, especially gender equality, poverty, like as Prof. Lihlu just referred, and mostly important also the issue of education and equality in the African continent. Policy coherence is an integrated approach. It should not just be seen for the economic or macroeconomic planning, but rather for the overall picture of national development planning at national level and also at sub-regional and continental level. And therefore, in the second 10 implementation plan of Agenda 2063, we are trying now to support countries to enhance an integrated framework for national planning for both agendas, while emphasizing the importance of domestic resource mobilization. These are the principles endorsed by the OECD, and because of the similarity and the methodology of EPRM as a country, as a national, as a continental voluntary-led mechanism to promote good governance on the continent, we have come up with this partnership to raise awareness about policy coherence and the key 8 principles of policy coherence concerning political commitment, strategic vision for the country, policy integration, whole of government coordination, subnational engagement, stakeholder engagement, and last but not least, the issue of impact and how policies are impacting the society and citizen in a way or another. I will not go through all the principles. You have the slides, and the participants can go through that, but I want to share with you the results from our first pilot project with 4 African countries, including Ghana, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Kenya. We have noticed that the political commitment of African countries through the national development plans, statements, designated SDGs, institutional setting or arrangements for SDGs have not been necessarily adequately associated with the ability of countries to mobilize resources for the implementation of both agendas. While acknowledging the voluntary national review process also, we noted that the level of awareness about both agendas alongside the finance for SDGs is quite minimal amongst African executives. We also noted that one of the weakest areas of implementation is the policy integration, how financing sectors like environment, energy, industrialization are correlated. We noted that countries are not necessarily aligning and ensuring that the integration of policies is adequately addressed during the planning cycle or the planning phase of National Development Plan. We noticed also that some countries prioritize some goals like education, health, or poverty, but they are not also considering the impact or trade-off on other goals like environment. Professor Hailo was referring to the governance ecosystem and how IT is important. I fully agree with that. But I want to say that also the institutional and coordination mechanisms alongside legislative bodies and the debt management laws, for instance, are very important to ensure transparency of national planning. I'm giving an example from Kenya. that Kenya recently converted the debt ceiling from absolute term of roughly $60 billion to present the value of GDP, which means that the country cannot just go and borrow money without, of course, getting the parliament approval, but they are not supposed to exceed certain ceiling set by the government for that. And we also noted that the parliament recently provides thresholds for the borrowing entitlements of the national government and county government and their entities as well. So it's only the parliament who has the capacity to revise that. We also noted that for policy coherence to succeed, it's very, very important to have multi-stakeholder engagement at the local level and sub-local level. But unfortunately, most African countries, they are struggling with the multi-stakeholder approach, either for financial resources limitation or for also lack of human resources to interact at local and county level, for instance. I am sharing here the example from Kenya because it was one of the countries we supported for policy coherence assessment. And we took note of how the institutional coordination mechanism is quite solid for the SDGs and Agenda 2063 planning. And also the two level of government that Kenya is enjoying and the district planning model, which is quite similar to the South African government. Having said that, when we went through the exercise of Kenya, for instance, if you look here, we noticed that the weakest point for Kenya is the issue of transboundary impact assessment and the impact assessment and the finance assessment for SDGs. So again, the issue of budgeting, as you can see here, for instance, or the issue of subcontinental engagement and financing strategy remains very weak. Ghana also was one of the interesting countries that we supported. And you can see in Ghana, they also have the district model. Having said that, also Ghana still struggle with the issues of transboundary impact assessment and evaluation and monitoring of policy coherence across the government structures. Namibia is maybe providing some more positive insights from the continent, especially as far as the integration of the SDGs and Agenda 2063 stand at the national planning. Having said that, they also have issues at the SG impact and how far SDGs support the skills for impact assessment. So I can go through this for the whole day, Christina, but moving to the second question about how EPRM is building trust for inclusive governance in Africa, we have been adopting different initiatives at continental level, especially the credit rating agency initiative to enhance debt and credit worthiness for African countries. And we're working with this closely with the UNDP and different financial institutions. We have also established a strong collaboration program with the UNDESA, and we are very grateful to Madame Geraldine Mulukiti for leading this program on behalf of SEPA to enhance and raise awareness about principles for effective governance of SDGs and how issues of corruption, for instance, can affect the financial management laws of the continent. Interesting enough, this morning I was just looking at a sheet shared from the UNDP in South Africa saying that according to the Department for Economic Development, corruption costs South Africa not less than 27 billion rand, approximately $1.9 billion. And the South Africa lose has reached 1.107 billion to illicit financial flows between 2005 and 2014, according to the Global Financial Integrity. So one more time, it shows how good governance affect issues of financial management. And I think all the slides were already shared with the colleagues. But last but not least, I want to say that overall, also, if we look at the weaknesses and opportunities, I think the role of legislative branch is extremely important to ensure this transparency in financial management and debt management. There is a need for coordinated approach and holistic approach at national level for coordinating efforts for the resource mobilization and the absence, and also to enhance the futuristic approach trajectory of how the country and how the continent is moving as far as financial sustainability is concerned. And I will end with the example from Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe, for instance, was one of the, I will not say bad examples, but has weakness areas, especially when it comes to financing SDGs and resource mobilization. And that's why the African Union also is trying now to strengthen this policy coherence mechanism between the African Union organs, the sub-regional level at regional economic communities, and also to support countries at national level to promote the SDGs and Agenda 2063. So I will leave the slides for your reference, and this is just about Agenda 2063, the second 10 implementation plan, and how, as you can see, finance, coordination, and coherence also will be very, very strategic in our operations. So thank you very much, Christina. I hope I didn't exceed the time dedicated for me. I want to speak longer, but maybe in another time. And we also welcome you, the partnership with you and OSAA, to be part of all these flagship initiatives in Africa. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you very, very much. Thank you for your presentation. With a quite, you again went in quite detail what needs to be done from a policy coherence, policy cohesion standpoint. And you are very clear in laying out, let's say, Africa's institutional weaknesses. I do believe that, again, your presentation complements very well Professor Fozo's presentation. And I'd like to take the opportunity of this webinar, allow me to now, for 1 minute, to address, before going to the last and third guiding question that I'll be asking to all panelists and giving the floor one by one, I would like to ask the participants of this webinar and the participants of the online training course, please, when listening, following these presentations, I hope it becomes clear to you the complementarity of these 4 presentations. My dear sister Geraldine provides, I would say, a strategic vision framework, and basically positioning at the center of that vision national planning systems, maybe as one of the most strategic and important institutions to activate, to put into motion, let's say, in African countries, in African nations. Because without that, as a structural precondition, it will be difficult in the process of institutional capacity building to keep ownership and to be able to fight back imported solutions. Then we move to Elio, that he laid down economic challenge. Actually, instead of improving, the trend is just the opposite. What is the missing piece? What is the missing piece? And then within these socioeconomic challenges from an African standpoint, of course, he laid down very well the role of digital transformation and digital public infrastructure. Elio's intervention is critical for the participants of this course. And allow me to be very open based on your presentation, if you allow me, Elio. Africa needs to be very careful in this digital era, as he mentioned, not to be perceived and treated as a consumption market for hardware and software. From a demographic standpoint, the next 30 years will be the market. And we need to be very careful. So this is the reason that he brings very important notions: social internet, connectivity as a public good, and the need to separate social internet or internet serving social purpose from internet serving other purpose. To do that, you need planning, what Geraldine mentioned. You need planning, you need a vision. And you need to understand, to be able to do that, you need to use your national planning system essentially as a tool to build ownership through institutional capacity building. Because institutional capacity building, again, I'm talking to the participants, institutional capacity building is not an end by itself. It's a means to achieve other levels of ownership and control. Then comes Professor Fossil. Okay, as you can see, based even also in the Sarah's presentation, everybody knows what to do. And why you are not doing? Please keep that question. I'm talking to the participant. Keep that question and apply that Professor Fossil's question to your own country and try to respond in your essay. Then Sarah's presentation closed, I believe, this cycle in a very beautiful way. It links very well with my dear sister Geraldine's presentation, where she lays down in a very clear way, with some examples, the importance of policy coherence, policy cohesion, again. And I would like to link what she presented very well to the fact that in a silent way, the opportunity costs of inefficiency in governance in Africa is increasing every day. Is increasing. So we don't see the bills landing in our desks, but they are. And now I move to guiding question 3, very quickly. And this is an open question to all the panelists. And is again trying to touch on policy cohesion and governance resilience. And this concept of governance resilience is quite important. In the last 15 years, or more, we have been hit by 2 deep international crises: 2007-8, the subprime, external shock. We have nothing to do with that, by the way. And then COVID-19, external shock. We have nothing to do with that. And was clear in the first and second one that Africa lacks governance resilience. And this is the question. If you allow me, I'm going to read it. What are the key achievements and challenges that face African countries to promote policy coherence across key sectors, such as finance, agriculture, and energy? Example. And enhance progress toward sustainable development. That guiding question 3 is to give you, the panelists, an opportunity to deliver your final statement before open the floor to questions and answers. And I would like to ask if you could answer that common question, let's say, keeping your angle. Value, DPI, technology, policy cohesion, planning systems, and let's go to the root causes. It's the same question, but responding to the same question, just keep the angle that you brought to this conversation. And allow me to just to follow the same order. And I would like to start with my dear sister, Geraldine. Geraldine, please.
I was hoping that you were going to reverse the sequence at this point in time. So on the issue of policy coherence and governance resilience, what are the key achievements? And I'm going to pick up from the same trend that you have introduced, that we have found ourselves over recent years in very difficult moments on the African continent and even globally. And that's whether we look at the whole issue of the impact of the COVID pandemic on countries. We look at the issue of conflict, or we look at the reality of the global economic instability at different points in time. So how do we deal with this, and what could we consider? So I'm again going to go to the issue of policy coherence, looking at policy and planning. And I'm going to now look at the question of vertical integration as a start. You know, vertical integration has been one of the key challenges that has been experienced in all regions of the world, and Africa has not come through this unscathed. It's also because the challenges that we've confronted globally, and I've spoken about the pandemic, has shown the need to be able to work across spheres of government, the need to work in an integrated way. And you would recall when you were still part of the Committee of Experts on Public Administration, we had quite extensive debates, USG, on the whole issue of how are we able to get multiple levels of government to work together? How are we able to rally countries into what we call a whole of government, whole of society response? And that does require the different spheres to work together and ensure coherence in response measures as we take that forward. And we can look at different approaches to this. Were there successes on the African continent? Yes, but were they as impactful as required? We would say we could do better. So I want to pick up on a point that was raised by my colleagues, and I'll start with Helio. So Helio raises the fact and says, let's use the fourth industrial revolution to facilitate this coherence. And he makes a very important point. And much as is in telecoms, I'm sure not everybody is comfortable with him when he talks about the issue about open sources, open systems, open standards and all. Because much as there's a view that you need social capital and you should ensure that there's greater access precisely to ensure integration both vertically and horizontally, the profit motive always comes in the way. But I'd love to hear Helio in future say how he's going to deal with that. And he shouldn't come with the issue of corporate social responsibility that narrowly talks about platitudes to deal with this issue. Because the extent of the problem on the African continent requires a very bold intervention to make a difference. Can we do it? Did we do it? Yes, we did. And we saw it through the way in which there was collaboration. And we even saw in South Africa, never mind elsewhere in the world, where universities had to, during the COVID period, move from physical teaching to online teaching, and they did it in an incredibly short space of time. In many instances, we were told it's going to take a decade to get materials online. And right now, the fact that we have this webinar shows that it's possible to do it. But do we do enough to ensure coherence in our response measures, and I'll definitely say no. So Professor Fosu, on the other hand, says, the question is not only how to do it, the question is, why don't we get it done? And I'm sorry, Professor, if I am mixing things up. And you say we do have institutional frameworks and all. But the issue is, are we adequately skilling people to be able to work within those institutional frameworks? And are they equipped to be able to move with the fourth industrial revolution? If I can go back to the point of a teacher is a facilitator, I think that was the term you used, and everybody is a student. And I want to take that further in a different way and say, do we have coders in parts of the continent that will be able to help us with the responses required? Because isn't it the children of mine workers who should be able to code so that we're able to get ahead on the issue of AI that will assist? So I should probably conclude by saying, the big question for me when I look at the issue of policy coherence and governance resilience, it's policy coherence and governance resilience for who? And when we deal with the issue of planning and the centrality of planning that is core, we need to ensure that it is contextual, but that we are able to horizontally draw on what is available on this continent to make a difference. And I leave on your desk, USG, the fact that we do have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. It has huge possibilities to help leapfrog us into a future. But why is it not happening? Is it because we become too inward looking? We fear to be bold in the interventions. We are not willing to collaborate in the way that's required and ensure that we invest in planning and coordination, whether vertically and horizontally, in a manner that's going to contribute to leapfrogging the development chasm that's required. Because that's the only way that we can then resolve some of the other questions. That includes the question that you have been dealing with over the last three sessions around addressing the realities of conflict on our continent and also drawing on our youth dividend. Thank you very much.
Geraldine, thank you. I move quickly to Elio because you are running out of time. Elio, and I'm already eating. We are already eating in the question and answers time. Elio,
Yes,
please
yes.
go short. I would appreciate it.
I will be very short. You know, the digital has a transformative power.
You need to speak louder. Sorry, Elio.
Digital has a transformative power.
Yes.
But in Africa, we are absorbing this technology following directives of the West. And this is critical for our development. We have had some disruptive technologies out of the directives of the West. M-Pesa in Kenya.
Yes.
You know, financial inclusion is dramatically important to eradicate poverty. And the logic of the West, you need to create banks. The physical infrastructure, because that's how they learned, that's how they developed. But in Kenya, they did not create the bank. They replaced it by this thing. And that's how they were able to leapfrog in financial inclusion. Education, they will tell us, create schools, more teachers, And this will maintain Africa forever behind. But if we use the power of this and change the logic of transmitting knowledge, I was talking with an American friend that said education is the worst enemy of knowledge, the traditional education. And the world is trying to change the way they bring knowledge, changing the profile of education. But if in Africa we think by ourselves and we take the whole power of technology, we can leapfrog dramatically. I believe deeply in this, and I would love to talk a lot more with Dr. Geraldine, because I think I need some social ecosystem to sustain this belief. But I really believe technology can make a difference and improve on the resilience according to the challenge that you make for Africa. But we need to look in Africa in a different way. We cannot look at internet like an European looks at internet. Okay, I'll pay some money, I'll work on Facebook, maybe I'll do some financing. No, this will put kids in the knowledge way. This will save lives, will save lives with health. This can make a difference in my developing my commerce. This can be an instrument for Africa, but we need to think differently. We cannot import models that they are telling us to do like they're doing in the West. No, it's wrong. We need to think by ourselves how we can make this a critical part of our lives.
Elliot, thank you. It seems that Sarah is requesting the floor because she needs to leave earlier. I need to apologize, Professor Fosu. Sarah, I will give you the floor. 2 minutes, Sarah, because I'm running out of time completely. It was such outstanding conversation before opening the floor. Sarah.
No, I think Prof. Helio,
your final statement, 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, I think Prof. Helio and Madame Geraldine said it all, speaking about vertical coherence, speaking about technology, very impressive, Professor Helio. I think we should invite you to our upcoming forum on South-South cooperation, which will take place in Sierra Leone in 2025. This is the third edition of the forum where a focus on building economic resilience in the continent will be emphasized. And of course, our mentor, Christina, will be on board for that. But Christina, speaking about the key challenges again and opportunities, I think the issue of data and the role of private sector in this policy coherence is very important. You cannot assume or project something that you are unable to measure. When EPRM conducted a quick survey with member states on the issue of resilience in 2021, only 4 African countries presented framework for resilient national planning, including South Africa. And it was very impressive how the South Africa or Statistics South Africa office projected the number of COVID-infected cases from March until December 2020, and the numbers at the end were almost the same. So I think we need to focus on the issue of data for governance and also financial accountability, the issue of private sector, because we keep telling the governments, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do that, but also where the private sector lies in that, and where is the role of social protection and social accountability of private sector and corporate governance, as you perfectly alluded. Lastly, but not least, and coming from Egypt, a country which belongs to the Arab and African platforms in different ways, we are still lacking in Africa the strong continental financial institutions that can speak on behalf of the continent and defend their rights for debt relief. I remember that there is a kind of platform between Arab funding institutions and the World Bank and IMF to try to relieve debt issues from some Arab countries, but I don't see this happening in Africa, and we are still a way to promote that. And lastly, but not least, the lack of awareness about policy coherence. We did a survey for academic purposes, and the African Union staff themselves still need to digest what policy coherence means at continental level. So you can imagine what is the level of awareness at national level if those at the continental management system need better awareness about policy coherence. So all of this should be considered. And I want to say that EPRM is also developing the 2025 AGR report, the Africa Governance Report, this year, and it will be launched next year. And it's focusing mainly on Africa natural resources governance of natural resources in the continent. And we are actually organizing some studies on Seychelles and Mauritius to see how the small islands also are coping with the governance of natural resources. And I believe that this will be also a very, very important knowledge product for the continent. So thank you very much for inviting us. I must excuse myself now, but thank you for such.
Sarah, thank you very much for making yourself available to participate in this outstanding conversation. And now, Professor Fordo, your last statement to the participants.
Yes, I will be very brief. Currently, we have a situation where there's policy incoherence between the central government and the local governments.
Yes.
Something that I refer to as political economic disequilibrium. That is, the central government actually wants the local government to depend upon the central government, which would then imply that there's less likelihood to have revenue autonomy in these local governments, which in turn leads to eternal fiscal deficit at the central level. So that is an issue that needs to be resolved going forward. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Foz. With your permission, I would like to move. I need to open the floor. Otherwise, someone will rate me as a very bad moderator, and I don't want. I don't want. So let me open the floor. I need the support of my team. It is my understanding that Alessandro, I can see the questions. Sorry, I'm already calling you my team.
No problem at all. On the background.
I can see the questions in the chat, correct?
Yes.
And it is my understanding, after that AI automated message, the first one is from Matodi Malope.
Correct.
And the question is addressed to Molekete, my dear sister Geraldine. So you stressed, Geraldine, the importance of planning and integrated approach towards institutional strengthening and debt management. Matodi Malope, let's call Malope, asked, how can states use the same approach to address skills development to ensure that developed policies are effectively implemented, including the detection and sorting of illicit money laundering? Basic Molekete, the question is bringing institutional building, the debate around institutional building at the end of the day narrows down to human capital development, and human capital development narrows down to people-centered policies. We keep dancing this conversation, but you'd like to understand from you, Geraldine, in your presentation, how you see human capital development, skills development. 1 minute, Geraldine.
Thank you very much for the question. How can the states use the same approach to address skills development? You know, there's two things if one wants to be pretty simplistic about this. We know that there has been national skills development policies and programs drafted. But in many instances, as was indicated by Professor Fosu, there tends to be a sense of policy incoherence between what the national skills requirements are and what is being, and I want to use this word carefully, churned out by higher education institutions. And what we need to look at is how do we ensure an alignment between national development and national economic needs, as well as skills development. At the moment on the continent, we have a major skills deficit, and there's a need to come together and determine how we respond to this. And this is going to require government, academia, labor, amongst others, to come together in, shall I call it, tripartite arrangements to find a solution to the national planning challenges within a country. I'm sorry, I'm being oversimplistic, but
no, you went to the point. Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you. I do believe that the next question is coming from Simbarache, and I will read, and I would like to address, I already read the question. I do believe that is perfect to Professor Fazio. What mechanisms, Professor Fazio, this question I would like to allocate to you if you allow me. What mechanisms can be put in Africa? What mechanisms can be put in Africa to curb illicit financial flows by multinational companies, corporations, operating within their boundaries as a way of domestic resource mobilization strategy? The reason I'm allocating this question to you, because it's a good example that everybody knows what is happening. Everybody knows what are the actors behind this phenomenon. Everybody knows what to do to curb illicit financial flows. Why you are not doing, Professor Fazio? Back to you.
Thank you. Great question. It's $1 million question.
Yes.
The final analysis, if people feel that they are safe, the assets are safe in a given country, I think that they're less likely to move their funds elsewhere. So having stability is sine qua non. And also ensure that we do not have misappropriation of property, expropriation of property, so that your property is safe. I think the environment is really critical. And the government should try as much as possible to ensure that people feel safe and that they can look into the future. They don't have to worry about what may happen, and therefore they want to kind of risk minimize. For me, that is critical. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Professor Fazio. And I would like to take the opportunity of this question before allocating a question to my dear friend Elio. Illicit financial flows. I would like to take the opportunity, again, I'm talking to the participants of the course. You already, I'm sure that you already saw in one of the previous module, I think was module 3, if I'm not mistaken, that based on one of our flagship reports of 2023, through analytical process of existing data from UN system, IMF, World Bank, Africa Development Bank, we calculated in an estimated way that Africa loses around $500 billion annually. That same continent, as I mentioned in my open remarks, is in debt distress. And this is the financing paradox of our 2023 report. Out of these $500 billion, 89 billion are illicit financial flows. Shimbarashi, illicit financial flows, $89 billion. The breakdown is in the report. But out of the $89 billion, 65% are trade mispricing. The question is, participants, now I want you to get Elio's presentation. How come in the 21st century, where technology is just vibrating, Africa loses around around $65 billion on trade mispricing, where trade mispricing, which is a very nice word, is cheating. Every time you import, you are cheated. Every time you export, you are cheated. Acknowledging that there are already technical solutions in the shelves to address that challenge. So it's not a lack of technical solutions. It's not a lack of technological solutions. And then I go to Professor Sousa's questions. It's a lack of what? If you know the phenomenon, the actors, we have been enjoying the solutions in the shelf in the past 15 years. How come we have been unable to address this issue? And then I would like to underscore Professor Sousa's intervention in this webinar. We need to go deeper and understand the root causes of these problems. To address the $65 billion in trade mispricing, we need to embrace digital country infrastructure. I'm already adopting your term, Elio. Digital country infrastructure as a survival issue to think, conceive, design development solutions in Africa. Now I move to the next question, Varelio, to you. Professor Varela made a point about internet being a social good, if I understood him correctly. How can we, through sustainable financing for infrastructure development, ensure that we make this a reality in light of 2030 agenda, and in Africa's case, in particular, Agenda 2063? And this extends from physical infrastructure to make internet access cheaper. For example, data in countries like South Africa and others still remain very expensive. This makes smart education and smart school, for example, a luxury where deepening and not resolving the digital divide. Varela, back to you.
Yes, definitely. Let me make a slight precision. I do not believe that Africa should make internet free. No. What I believe is that Africa should have two concepts of internet: internet for development, internet for entertainment. Internet for entertainment should not be free. It should be at a lower price in Africa, but not free. Internet for development, that should be free for Africa. And this is where we need to think from African perspective the world. We need to cut down our challenges of building physical infrastructures to develop our countries. On education, we do not need, or we need to complement our very slow increase of education infrastructure, physical education infrastructure, with digital infrastructure. And this is where I see internet for free. Every citizen to get access to knowledge content, curated knowledge content under African artificial intelligence content should be free. Every citizen should have access to knowledge free. Every citizen should have access to health systems for free. This means the infrastructure that Africa is building for telecommunications should have a social part. When they give licenses for 3G, for 4G, for 5G, they must have some commitments. In my country, we do have a part that we have to pay as an operator for information society. It should not be for information society. It should be for this social bridge for everyone. So that's just to make a slight precision. And we can change Africa. Trust me, we can change Africa if we give the real power to the digital infrastructure.
Thank you very much. I have 1 minute to close our webinar. So I will jump to the closing part, let's say. Today's sessions underscore the importance of robust institutions and governance in managing Africa's financial and economic flows, again, sustainable financing, and achieving sustainable development, one of the main conceptual pillars of OSAA's online training course. We explore strategies to enhance transparency, accountability, efficiency through digital public infrastructure, strengthen domestic resource mobilization, and promote policy cohesion across sectors. So thank you to all our panelists for such outstanding conversation. And allow me to address a special thank you to OSAA's participants in our online training course. Thank you very much. And I wish you a wonderful the rest of the day. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you,
so
Madam
much.
Moderator. Excellent job.
Thank you.